Hola, good morning and welcome to another session of character modeling with me, Steve Moore, aka S'more. Now, what we're going to do this week is follow up on making a texture for our real-time hair cards. In the last couple of episodes, we made some hair cards with XGen and Maya. And now I wanted to make a texture for those cards, and we're going to use Fibermesh and ZBrush, right? So to begin, what we're looking at here is just a simple polygon, just 4 points in space. And what we're going to do, this is going to be what we generate our hair from. So we're going to be using Fibermesh, which makes fibers, and those can be used to create hair and fur and all kinds of wonderful things, but you need something to generate those fibers from. So to begin, we will go to geometry and subdivide this puppy. Now I've turned off smooth modifier because I don't want to turn this into a circle, right? So we're going to just divide it a bunch of times. I'm going to divide it like 7 times. The reason we're doing that is so we can paint a mask, right? Because you need some polygons. Poly paint and masks are done per vertex, so you need some vertices. They don't need to be a lot, so you can see this is kind of chunky. You could say pixelated. They're not pixels, they're polygons, but it looks like the same thing, right? And all I need is just a bit of a mask, and this is gonna define where the fibers are generated from. They're going to be generated from this masked area, right? So that's a cool thing right out of the gate. So you can define where you want them. And by the way, oopsie, I'll turn on perspective so you can see this. By the way, this, and we'll turn on the floor too. This polygon I've set at an angle and by the way, I just made this in Maya. You know, it could be anywhere, Blender, Max, whatever. But I just made this little polygon and I angled it at 45 degrees. And the reason I did this is because, you know, this is going to be the roots of our texture. So we're making like kind of a little clump of hair, and I don't want the roots to be in a perfect straight line. So I set this kind of field at an angle so that, you know, we'll have kind of an irregular shape to our roots. And we can tune that in Photoshop later too, but, you know, just to start with, we want something that's not perfectly straight. So now to the Fibermesh settings. Okay, so under, let's see, geometry, and we go down a little further here, we should find Fibermesh. And to begin, you're just going to click on preview and you immediately get some fibers. And they will not render in real time because they're very expensive. So you'll see them, you know, depending on your machine perhaps, but you can see this kind of clump here, very dense fibers. Kind of looks like dark gray grass at the moment, and you can see how they're kind of leaning towards the ground there. That's because of the gravity setting, and that we'll find under modifiers. So here we go. This is where it gets interesting. So we've got our initial fibers. Well, let's take a look at some of these settings, and let's start with gravity. So at the moment, gravity's, you know, you've got kind of gravity set to 0.5, and that's causing these fibers to lean down. So let's just take gravity out of the mix. Let's turn that to 0, and boom. Now they're kind of generated perpendicular to the plane, and that's fine because what we're doing here is a bit of a magic trick, right? So it doesn't, you know, what matters is what you kind of see in this viewport. This is the angle we're going to kind of render our fibers out for our texture. So you know, you could, if you wanted to make them go kind of directly up, you could just set it to 0, you know, -1, and now they're going to fly kind of directly straight up. Anyway, I've been playing around. I like just kind of 0. It doesn't matter if it's flying towards the camera. It matters what it appears like in the camera. Okay, so here we go. Now Next, let's dial the length up. So I want long here. I want kind of a long clump. So I'm going to dial that all the way up to 2000. Boom. There we go. So we've got some here. And of course, right now it looks like a bushy raccoon's tail, but don't worry. We will fix that momentarily. So by the way, the goal here, first you want to create kind of an ambient kind of wispy kind of layer of here that kind of fills the volume, but it's not super dense. And then we're going to flesh that out with separate chunks of like what I'll call hero fibers, you know. So we'll make kind of like a broad area of here for our texture, and then we'll come in and we'll add more details in layers, basically. So this is gonna be a kind of a broad area of here, and so I don't want it to be this dense, right? So to fix that, if we look up modifiers again, you've got max fibers and coverage, and these two things play off each other. Max fibers is going to limit the number of fibers in the scene, and I'm going to dial that right down, like let's say 2, right? Like, yeah, because I don't actually want super dense here. I want something that's pretty light and fluffy. And for the coverage, I'm going to go even lower. I'm going to go 1. Okay, so that doesn't look like much at all, but when we render it, let's take a quick look. And this is where, you know, there's a big difference between Fibermesh, the render settings, and the preview settings. And because my document, you know, because the document is set to gray, it's hard to see. So I'm going to take this down to black and render it again. And so this is more like what we're going to get, right? I think also it's going to help us if we go into the base color. This is the texture of the fibers, right? So we can take the tip, and now it's easier to see against that black background. And base is like your roots, so it's kind of darker roots, lighter tip, which is, you know, which is natural. Think of blonde here, maybe here that's been colored or bleached blonde. It's going to be darker at the roots, right? And I'm going to, and actually now texture, what I'm going to do is go for lighter values, which enables us to edit later. So like, you know, you could take this texture and then you could colorize it. For example, if you wanted red here, you could put a layer of red. If you wanted dark brown here, easy to tune that, right? So good to start out with the lighter values. And anywho, so let's truck on here. So now we can see our fibers a little better. So far so good. We've covered gravity, the max fibers, and coverage, and the length. We've got the length set just so. Cool. Okay. Now, and when we render this, it's interesting. Like, you can see how it's flaying out right now. Now that we can fix a little bit with the clumps. Now we're also going to be able to groom this and kind of tighten it up with the pinch brush later. But to start, let's dial the clumping up, which is going to pull the hair in towards the tips, right? So that, as you can see, is kind of tightening things up a little bit. And that's good enough for me. You know, I think that will do the job. And we shall, so we're going to roll with these settings. And before we move on, let's save these settings, right? So we can save these settings, and that means fibers, I'll call them fibers light, right? That means that the next set of fibers we do, we can just load these settings back up, and it'll save us time. All right. So once we're happy, we click accept, and now you'll see in the subtool we now have they're actually editable fibers. They still look the same when we render, but yeah, they're a subtool that we can now groom, and this is where the fun begins. Grooming. Here we go. Okay, so now to groom our hair, and to do this, now, you know, I'm running an old version of ZBrush here, but anywho, you know, you do have all these specific groom brushes set up and stuff, but I I found, basically, I found, via experiment and also just seeing what other artists do on the internet, just plain old move, just the plain old sculpting brushes, move, smooth and pinch, for example, really do the job. But the trick, right, the caveat is that, so if we're going to start with a move brush, you're going to want to go down to the Fibermesh settings for the brush itself, and right at the top here you see this preserve length. So at 0, that means when I move it, it's just gonna drag those fibers off into space as far as I want. But what I really want is like as if I was combing it the hair, right? So I don't want to change the length. I want to keep the length the same. So I'm going to say preserve length 100, which means on, right? We're on. We're not going to change the length of these fibers. And now let's dial up our smooth brush, and now we can start putting a little curvature into them, right? And there you go, Bob's your auntie, right? So, and I'm keeping this light and fluffy, right? So the goal being, just to have like some broad, and this is actually thicker than I would like it, but that's okay, it's a demonstration, right? So, and now maybe I'll use the pinch brush to kind of bring the ends in a bit, and again with the pinch brush make sure you put preserve length on, and now we can taper those ends a bit. There you go. So starting to look like here. That's cool. That's good enough for government work. So let's make some more fibers. So back to our trusty hair field there, and I will erase that first mask, and we'll make another one. And this time we're going to clear mask. We're going to make what I'll call a little hero here. All right. So this is going to be just a little dude. All right, here we go. So mask and back to Fibermesh. Batman. There she is. I get lost. There's so many. I get lost in all these. Even though I've been staring at this for years, still get lost in those menus. I'll turn off the other one just sort of for clarity's sake, and of course give it a quick render to see what we're really getting. All right. Now because because this is a smaller dot on our field, that remember that these settings, max fibers and coverage, is relative to that area, by the way. So what we're going to get here is kind of denser still, but I think I want to roll with that. I could make it denser, but I think this is actually, relatively speaking, because of the tighter area, this is good. And so I'm just going to go ahead and click accept. Okay, so we've got another clump of fibers here, and let's immediately out of the gate, let's dial that pinch brush up and bring them together, and we'll go back to our smooth brush, turn that in, there we go. Little pinch action there. If we go to the smooth brush and turn preserve length on for smooth, now there we go. See what we get here. Cute. Okay, and a little bit more pinch, I think. A little bit more. Move it in. All right, it's starting to look like something. All right, so now Now's a good time to cheat, I think. So we could make another fiber by hand, but I'm just going to duplicate the last one we created. Go down to our trusty transpose brush and just move her across. Yeah, so what I'm doing here is cheating. Now, one of the things I like about here, which you'll see here a lot, is kind of this overlapping business. So if I think if I move this sucker in here, it is hard to see in the preview. So you have to have a bit of imagination. Yeah, so there you go. So now it's starting to, you know, you're getting this kind of overlapping action, looking a little bit more like here. Cool. Okay, so more of the same here. So I'm just going to speed through it. I'm fleshing out the foreground a bit with some finer fibers. The one thing I'd point out is in this situation, I did turn the preserve length down a bit, down to about 50% on the move tool, and that enabled me to stretch the hair out a little bit longer. That's the only real difference here, and we'll take a closer look at that momentarily. Okay, just to wrap this thing up and before we move on to making the textures, the final textures, let's just add a few finishing touches to this sucker, right? So we want to make a nice tight, wispy, what I'll call hero strand. And so therefore I'm going to just subdivide this this field here, I keep calling it, a few more times so I can get a tighter little spot. And I will make a tiny little dot there. Okay, so let's back to Fibermesh, hit the preview button. This time I'm going to dial the clumps up more, so let's dial up to 1, because my goal is to make a nice thin strand here. So therefore I'm going to dial up the clumps, and I'm going to try dialing up the segments a bit too, like 8, just so I get more smoother fiber. Okay, and let's click accept. All right, so far so good. Now, next trick, I want to make this particular strand longer. So with the move brush active, I'm going to turn preserve length down. Let's turn it all the way down to 0, right? So now, when we dial this out like that, it increases the length. Right now with the pinch brush, I'll leave it at 100. All right, so by now you've got the idea, so I'm just going to speed through this a little bit here. Cool. It's still a bit thick, but you know what? I can cheat this. So let's just take a look at what it looks like relative to the others. Let's have a quick look here. Well, that actually helps. So I'm going to be greedy, and I'm going to take this one we've just created, and I'm going to duplicate that one again, and let's go to our trusty transpose brush, right? So I'll turn on the here field as a reference and check this out. Okay, so with the transpose brush active, you click on this little magnet that enables us to reposition it. I'm even going to reorient it, right? So because I've got my clumps kind of going at this weird 45. I've been doing them this way. I think I might, the next hair texture I do, I might actually just have them going, I'll have the roots at an angle, but I'll set the gravity to -1 so that they're just going straight up. It's probably going to be a better way to do it. I'll admit that. Okay, so check this out. Now we're going to scale this puppy longer and tighter and smaller, right? Both. There. All right. Turn off our hair field. render one more time. And Bob Saransi, I think for this demo, that should do it for the Fibermesh. And let's take lastly, let's take a look at making our textures. Here we go. Okay, so now it's time to make some textures, and the way we're going to do that is we're going to utilize the BPR renderer. And the very first thing I want to do is make our diffuse map, right? So to do that, we're going to render the scene using the BPR renderer. And I've been leaning towards setting the background to so it's not completely black there. Then we avoid kind of getting like a black outline around our texture. The alpha map should take care of that, but just to be safe, right? So I'll give it a medium gray value, hit the BPR render button, see what we get. Okay, I think that's pretty good because the roots are darker, and if you do, if some of this background color is present, it won't be the end of the world. So I'm happy with that. Okay, so we're going to export this sucker. So to do that, we're going to go up to Document, Export. I've got a nice little folder called Renders here, and I shall name this here text diffuse. Boom. All right, so that's the basis for our diffuse map. Now the other thing we're going to want, if you go up to Render, BPR Render Pass here, there's a couple of useful maps here. So this is basically our diffuse map broken into its various channels: shaded, depth, shadow, AO, mask, and subsurface scattering, right? The things that I think are going to be useful to us are the depth map. The depth map could be useful depending on the engine you're using. You could literally use it like a parallax map, for example, to give your hair some depth. So we're going to export that one, and we'll call that depth. And the other thing that will be most important to us right now would be the mask, which is essentially your alpha map. So we're going to export the mask, and of course we'll call that alpha. Done. Cool. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, here we are in Photoshop. I even know I'm running an old version of Photoshop also, but there's our diffuse render, our depth, and our alpha. So we're going to diffuse map. We're going to bring in our depth as well, and finally we're going to take out our alpha. So here we have the nice alpha map. We'll put all those in one scene, and I shall save this as here text. Got one layer here and just call it here text underscore one. And of course we're going to iterate on it. Whoopsie. Alpha, depth, naming these layers. Oh baby. And finally diffuse. Okay. So the first thing I want to do, and I'm actually going to put this in a group called alpha, right? So, because we're going to do a little bit of editing of this alpha map. So, and specifically what we want to do is fix the roots. So, as you know, we kind of offset things to try and get more of an irregular root line for the hair, but it does look a bit odd there. So, to fix that, I'm going to drop in a gradient. And I will make a new layer. I'm not going to worry about naming that one. Make sure our fill is set to black. And G for the fill color. Alrighty. Now, we'll make that mask out of that. And back to gradient. So the gradient, so we want it to go pretty quick, pretty sharp gradient. I'll invert that. All right, and so that kind of takes care of things, but I would say still a bit regular, so I'm going to go in with my brush here and just dial up the brush size, and maybe just introduce some of the map back in there. So it's started with a gradient and just doctoring it up a little bit. Okay, so there you go. So let's say that's good enough. It's all right. Here's an interesting thing while we're on the subject of alpha maps. So as you know, most engines, you've got two types of alpha. You've got blended alpha, which is where you have, which is essentially what we have right now. Like if you go, it is pixelated, but you can see there's values in here. There's grays and whites. Now, blended alpha is possible to use, but it's extremely expensive. So you really don't see it being used on real time here in games. What they use instead is cutout alpha, which means if it's either white or black, and the engine, if you put a map with grayscale in the engine like this, it's going to clamp it. So to get around that, what we do is what's called a dither. Now, your engine, like maybe you're using Marmoset, for example, or what have you, it's quite possible the engine will do the dither on the engine side. But just for shits and giggles, let me show you what a dither map is about. So we want to get rid of all these gray values. Now here's a neat trick. So up under image, go down to mode, and currently it's an RGB image, right? Even though it's black and white, it's full color, right? So we're going to switch to index color. And when that comes up, we're going to roll with uniform, and we're going to set the number of colors to 16-bit. And voila, our image is now what you call dithered. So, and we've gotten rid of all the gray. The nice thing is, you'll notice, is it's basically a pointillism picture. So it is literally alpha test, right? It's black and white. There's on or off, but from a distance, it has the effect of a gradient, right? And that's the trick, right? So instead of having big janky pixels, you actually you do get something of a gradient. All right, so now we're going to make a color map for this. Now it may be that you may decide, or you may find yourself tinting the color of your hair on the engine side, but let's just say for argument's sake that we're going to do it in Photoshop here. I did that for my Shiu model. I colorized it in Photoshop. So I have over here some reference material. This is another example of a hair texture I made with Fibermesh. It's a little better, so I kind of left it up there to show you guys. Here's my reference material, right? So this is going to be the reference for the color, and we'll copy that over to our texture page. Cool, and just put it off to the side. And now I'm just going to add a little blur to it, right? So we'll Gaussian blur, just 10%, just to simplify things, right? Okay, cool. So far, so good. Now let's go back to our alpha channel, right? And specifically, let's go back to the original unedited alpha for this one. I'm going to copy that. And I will drop that in a new alpha channel. So I'll create an alpha channel, paste that in there. And Bob's around to turn those layers back on. Hide the alpha again. And let's make a new layer. Boom. And before we do anything else, add layer mask. And now our alpha channel is masking out this empty layer. Cool. Turn off the alpha. And so this, let's say that this is going to be the background, right? So so it's clear, I'm going to first fill this. So I'll fill this with the darker value that's going to be our background hair color. And this hair texture is not going to be a lot of values. It's just going to be simple. Invert that. That's our background color, right? Bit red. I'm going to just make it background color a little bit neutral. So I'll just drop the saturation a little bit. It's not super important, but anywho, there you go. Now for the color of the hair, I'll make one more layer, and I will sample like kind of maybe this a lighter value here, and voila. Now if I go multiply, it's a bit dark, and there's all kinds of ways to skin this cat, right? So like maybe there, and I'll duplicate it one more time. This is a bit funky here. Turn that to colorize, and there you go. So I've got basically a grayscale image, I've got a background color, I've got a value, and the actual color of the hair. And you know, maybe I'll take the background down a little bit more, and there you go. Right, so there's our hair texture ready to go. She's a bit red, but we can always drop a hue sat on that, you know, so it's not quite so red. Turn the saturation down a little bit. And Bob's your auntie. There's our texture. All right, so our diffuse is almost there, but it's a bit flat, you know. So one last thing, just to pop this diffuse channel and knock it out of the park, knock it home, right? So if you might remember, we made this depth map here. So why don't we take the depth map, make a copy of it, and let's stick that just over the base diffuse map we rendered out of ZBrush, and I'll turn the blending mode to multiply, and we'll also take down the background color to be more in line with the darker values we've got now. There you go. I think, you know, so you can see now you've got a little bit more, you know, you've got some overlap in forms there. So this is what we had before the depth channel and after. Now all that's left to do now is to composite this along with your other textures that you'll make into a single page, you know, a square page of various hair textures, and you're good to go. So with that, I'll leave you guys, and until next time. All right, happy modeling. Ciao.